History Inside a Nutshell, the show where we sail into our port of call discussing maritime history. So this month we are going to be looking into the Lusitania. Now, even though the Lusitania sank in May, August would be a good time to go into depth. So throughout August, this channel is going to be the centre for future videos of the Lusitania. And the video that's going to kick us off this month is the story of the lifeboats. Lifeboats of the Lusitania. What went wrong? On the 7th of May 1915, the Cunard liner, the RMS Lusitania, sank off the coast of Ireland following a hit from the German submarine U-20. As a result of the sinking, nearly 1,200 lives were lost, including 123 Americans. This was the first event that gave the United States the excuse to join the First World War, but they wouldn't declare war on Germany until April 1917. 1 month after the disaster, an inquiry was held in London, led by Lord Mersey, the same person who led the British Titanic inquiry. The inquiries ran for 4 days, and by July, Mersey gathered all the findings to piece together the cause of the incident. One of the features of the investigation was the Lusitania's lifeboats. When it came to the inquiry, the lifeboats weren't mentioned in greater depth. However, based on the backlog of research and looking through articles, laws and testimonies, this video will be able to deliver open resources and explain what happened to the lifeboats during the sinking. But to understand them, we need to go back to the beginning. 8 years before the sinking of the Lusitania, the rules for lifeboats on British vessels were to be placed based on tons instead of capacity. These rules would be followed under instructions from the British Board of Trade, which all shipping companies had to follow. Alexandra Carlyle, the general manager and chairman of the Harland & Wolff shipyard, proposed that the Titanic and her 2 sister ships, the Olympic and the Britannic, would use a new and larger class of davits. With these new iron, brass and steel davits, they would have been able to carry 48 lifeboats. However, this was rejected as it was illegally breaking the regulations. In 1912, the Titanic sank off the coast of Newfoundland while on her maiden voyage. 1,500 people perished, while 712 people survived. Although Carlyle never got the ship to carry 48 lifeboats, the ship had the regular 16 lifeboats plus 4 additional collapsible lifeboats. Because of the 4 additional lifeboats, 1 in 7 or 14% additional lives had been saved. Following the disaster, both the British and American boards created new laws that all vessels should have mandated lifeboat drills and include lifeboats that are based on capacity instead of tons. These recommendations were incorporated into the International Convention for the Safety of Life at Sea. The Titanic disaster taught lessons on lifeboat safety, but despite the changes in the law, the crew and the captain of the Lusitania broke the regulations, which would turn into serious consequences. When the Lusitania completed her maiden voyage in September 1907, she proved to the world that the fastest liners can be the safest at sea. Of course, this was a time before the Titanic. When the Titanic sank beneath the Atlantic waves, things had changed. Despite the change in the regulations, the Lusitania's lifeboats were upgraded from 16 to 48 lifeboats, including 22 that were hung from the davits. Each lifeboat was fixed on the decks and would be swung in Welling-class iron davits and landed on the deck on skids. In late April 1915, before making her way to New York and following Board of Trade regulations, boat, fire and bulkhead drills were carried out in Liverpool. At the time, it was the custom of the Cunard Line to do so. This was repeated every day, but according to his testimony, Captain William Turner said that the crew and stewards weren't proficient or skilled in handling the lifeboats. They are competent enough. They want to practice, he said to Lord Mersey. They do not get practice enough, and they do not great experience. When the Lusitania docked in New York City on the 1st of May, the lifeboats were examined by Neil Robinson, the ship's carpenter. During that time, the skids were oiled. After inspection, Robinson gave the lifeboats the all clear, saying that they were in perfect condition. However, despite sailing into a war zone, the collapsible lifeboats were decided not to be loosened. This was taken to save passengers from being injured, but this was a decision that would bring consequences. On the afternoon of the 7th, at 2:10 in the afternoon, the Lusitania was struck by U-20 while she was sailing in the Celtic Sea. When it was hit, the Lusitania began to sink by the bow, and instantly, lifeboat number 5 was destroyed by the impact, splintering the lifeboat into pieces. Despite this, Captain Turner gave the order to turn the ship hard to starboard, trying to reach land for safety. He didn't realise the ship was sinking while this was taking place. Passengers who did notice were in terror and were confused as to why the lifeboats weren't launched. One survivor, James Leary, recalled a situation where, after saying to a crewman that sailors were legally required to save passengers before abandoning the ship, the crewman replied, "Passengers be damned, save yourself first." 10 minutes after the impact, Captain Turner gave the order, all women and children into the boats first, and to lower the lifeboats down to the railings. Straight away, all of the collapsible lifeboats were loosened from their lashings and freed. But before the lifeboats were launched and without order, lifeboat number 18 had begun loading passengers. While the boat was being loaded, a seaman stood by it and held an axe ready to knock the pin holding the boat down. Having lost his patience and seeing the water creeping up the forecastle, New York businessman Isaac Lehman pulled out a revolver and confronted the seaman. When he did, the seaman responded with these words, "It is the captain's orders not to launch any boats." "To hell with the captain," cried Lehman. "Don't you see the boat is sinking? And the first man that disobeys my orders to launch the boat, I shoot to kill." The sailor knocked the pin out, but the boat swung back on board the ship and slipped down the deck with the starboard list, instantly crushing people to death or pinning them to the wall. At around 2:20 p.m, an incident occurred between two lifeboats. The lifeboats that were launched in the incident were numbers 9 and 11. Lifeboat number 9 was launched at 2:19 p.m, but there have been reports that say that the falls jammed, and as a result, it got stuck alongside the Lusitania while the liner was still moving through the water. Suddenly, without warning, Lifeboat 11 was underneath number 9, still in the davits. In the recent animation created by Jack Gibson, you can see lifeboat number 11 lowering into the sea. However, its lowering caused a huge alarm as the fall was released too quickly. Because of the rush, the lifeboat crashed down and landed on top of lifeboat number 9, swamping it and crushing its components. The occupants were either killed instantly or badly injured. Lifeboat number 9 sank beneath the waves. Lifeboat 14, the only lifeboat to be launched from the port side successfully, filled up with water before it was swamped because of the lack of a plug in the bottom. It then capsized repeatedly. When it capsized, occupants hung themselves upside down. On lifeboat number 1, Leslie Morton and his brother successfully lowered lifeboat 1, but the lifeboat was full of passengers and had no crew members. Lifeboat numbers 2, 3, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 16, 19 and 20 were lost with the Lusitania. However, with lifeboat number 10, it launched itself and lost control where it landed itself on top of the 8 passengers. Lifeboat number 7 was one of a few that were filled, mainly filled with women and children. However, the crowds didn't make room for crew members to reach for the davits. After the lifeboat had failed to lower, the frightened witnesses on the lifeboat saw that it was going down with the ship. In lifeboat number 17, the occupants were tossed into the sea when 2 men jumped inside the boat while it was still lowering and snapping the ropes. Lifeboat number 15, the most crowded lifeboat with over 100 people on board when it could hold 80, had a close call when, within 15 seconds of landing in the water, the boat rose back up at the boat deck. Because of how quickly the Lusitania was making her descent in her final moments, the gravel force of the water caused pressure between the boat deck and one of the funnels. The funnel in question, likely to be the 4th funnel, loomed overhead, and with the heavy list to starboard, occupants were horrified to see it coming towards them. It was so close that some survivors said they could touch it. Had not the Lusitania recovered from her list, the funnel would have crushed the occupants to death. The lifeboat caught itself in the aerial wires during the ship's final plunge, but managed to escape. Lifeboat numbers 13, 21 and 22 launched successfully. However, lifeboat number 22 floated off the Lusitania's deck upside down. At 2:28 p.m, the ship founders. So, what went wrong? From all the evidence gathered, is it possible that the lifeboats weren't prepared, and if there was a lack in training? The main resources centre on Senior Third Officer John I. Lewis, who described the lifeboats and the drills under the supervision of the Board of Trade Surveyors before the sinking. Lewis explained that while the ship was in Liverpool, the crew had a mustering drill where they muster all hands and swing the lifeboats on board. At this time, despite following orders, boats weren't lowered and were never placed in the water. In New York, the lifeboats on both port and starboard sides were mustered, swung out and lowered onto the deck, but they weren't put in the water. However, as mentioned earlier in the video, an inspection took place. While at sea, the crew carried out an emergency boat drill. During the drill, 2 special boats, believed to be lifeboat numbers 13 and 14, were swung out by special wire guys, spread out between the 2 davits with a lifeline attached to these reaching down to the water's edge. Lewis described what happened during this time. Early morning, or usually every morning, the whistle would go and these men went back to muster at the emergency boat, whichever side of the ship was the lee side. There was a picked crew from the watch. In case of an accident, anybody falling over the side or any other accident, these were the men who were told to go into the boat. They had to muster in front of the boat and see that the numbers of the men were right, and 2 men would be standing by the fall for lowering. At each end, then after these fellows would stand at attention in front of the boats, and I would say, "Man the boats," and these men would get into the boats and put their life belts on and sit in the number of their place in the boat. After I saw that everything was all correct, I would dismiss them from the boats. On the 6th of May at 5:30 a.m, Lewis had carried out an operation that had begun on deck to raise and swing the boats out on both port and starboard sides. We fixed these men, that would be about 6 to 8 men to a boat, along on the port side, and then I walked to just opposite that Marconi house, where I could command both ends of the ship at the time, and ordered them when I gave the word that all boats were to go out at the same time, because if they didn't do that, there would be a mix-up of guys, and one thing and another. They had to put them all out together. They had to put them out all together, or they would have a deuce of a lot of trouble putting them out. On the 6th, the boats were swung out and lowered down to be on a level with the collapsible boats, measuring at 5 feet. After they were swung out, they remained on deck of the collapsible boat that was originally had been stowed under because of the protruding rivets. Only the starboard side could lower the lifeboats safely. When the Lusitania was sinking, attempts for launching operations had proven perilous, and the 1,959 frightened people were left in the hands of inexperienced crew members and a stubborn captain. In one testimony, it was confirmed that there was the difficulty owing to the list. With this difficulty, the result was that loading people into them before hitting the water's edge would have been impossible. When the lifeboats were eventually lowered, those on the port side had difficulty lowering into the sea. While leaving the ship, they would have scraped and bumped down the side of the ship. Some of them would have either break into pieces, swung out to the deck, or instantly turn, plunging people into the water. Another thing that was pointed out was the leaky condition of the lifeboats. No one was aware that the lifeboats were leaking until the boats were in the water. Some of the boats had been fouling the side of the ship, and in one case the stern post was wenched away. One in particular was mentioned by William Carnes. Following the disaster, he reported that the boat he was in began to leak when it touched the water. When the boat was filling up with the water, Carnes jumped out and swam away. In the end, only 6 lifeboats left the ship and survived the ordeal. After arriving in Queenstown, the 6 lifeboats were either sold or scrapped. This was the case for lifeboat number 6. Collapsible A was donated to the Broadstairs Town Council and went on display until 1947. After the inquiry, it was concluded that Captain Turner had complained about the poor condition, but despite his feelings and listening to the other complaints about the lifeboats, he never inspected them before the Lusitania left New York on the 1st of May. These actions of not properly inspecting the boats and the crew poorly trained during the ship's last voyage were inexcusable. Captain Turner, after involving himself in another sinking, was given a desk job while still employed with Cunard. He died in 1933. The sinking of the Lusitania shows that despite the safety regulations that had been legally put in place, there is no guarantee that a place inside a lifeboat can save a person's life. But, like the Titanic, the sinking had made changes, including lifeboat drill training. Sadly, these changes didn't change the safety of the people who died in the disaster, but we are hopeful that lessons were learned, carrying them on into the 21st century. If you enjoyed this episode, please like and subscribe for future videos. Until next time, this has been History Inside a Nutshell, departing from the docks. Thank you so much for all of your support and enjoy the rest of your voyage.